All right, what about now? Anything now? Anything? All right, hey, I'm so sorry about that. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so sorry about that. Clearly, this is my first time going live on WebStream in 2025. Yeah, got a little rusty over the holidays. My apologies. So, there is a feedback sound. Okay, I hope the feedback sound went. I just realized I had the stream up on my laptop next to me, so I closed that. Hopefully, that addressed the feedback. If there are still feedback issues, let me know in the chat. All right, so let me see. Let me give you a little background. So let me just basically start over here. So what I was saying is that the market size slide is probably one of the top 3 slides in your deck. And this is definitely something I didn't appreciate or understand when I was on the small business side, when I was, creating companies, trying to get them funded, is just how important this was. And we're going to talk a little bit about grounding issue, but isn't loud. Huh, just a buzz. That's interesting. I wonder what that is. But thank you for the feedback on the buzz. I'm going to try to figure out what the root cause for that is. So what I was going to say is that I think legitimately, if you just had a deck that was nothing but an incredibly compelling problem slide, an incredibly compelling market slide, and an incredibly compelling team slide, that would be amazing. Like, I think you could actually get funded just on the strength of having those 3 slides. It's literally the market sizing slide is that important. And so today we're going to talk about what those can look like, what I would argue good looks like here, and then also how to make yours. So let me give you a preview of what, this is just what I think good looks like, and I'm going to share this with you. I think there are a lot of different ways to do this, but yeah, this is my belief. I'm just going to give you a preview now so that you have a little bit of a sense for like what we might be looking toward. All right, so yeah. So this is something along the lines of what I think we should be aiming for. It's a market. And then we're going to break the market out into a couple different pieces. We'll talk about what each of these 4 pieces actually mean. But that's the goal. It's to create something that segments our market by a couple different categories. And I personally really like to put these representative contracts in the slide also. This is maybe different from what other people would say. This is, probably, I don't think you would necessarily say this in a commercial market sizing deck, but the realities of communicating what your market is made up of, it gives you a lot of credibility, I think. And when I see startups putting this into their pitch, I find it tremendously credibility building when I see some representative contracts along the way. All right, so that's just a little bit of a preview of what I would say good looks like. All right, cool. What? So, all right. So what we're going to be covering today, we're going to cover a couple different things. Number one, we're going to cover whether you need a market size slide at all. Because honestly, there's probably some people using slide at all. Okay? So, using slide at all. Okay? So, but assuming you are one of the people who I would recommend have one, number two, I would say we're going to look at how to size your market in 2 ways. One's like more or less a bottom-up approach to sizing, and one of them is a little bit more of a top-down sizing. Okay. Next, we'll be covering tips and tricks, and I see what I think good looks like here. Little bit of behind the scenes on what investors I think are looking for, at least what we look for. I can't speak for any other investors, but certainly these are the conversations we're having. So let's start off. So let's start off with whether or not you need a federal market size slide at all. And here's what I would say. If you are principally a dual-use technology and you are principally going to go to market, so let's call it the next 3 to 5 years, just in terms of commercial, and it's an incredibly compelling commercial opportunity, you might not actually need a full federal go-to-market piece. Because, like, honestly, if I look at the J2 portfolio, the majority of the companies were not thinking about federal sales, federal funding when they came to us. They were thinking, hey, we're going to build a wonderful commercial product, and then, that was it. Then they got connected to us somehow. They weren't thinking federal, but someone said, hey, you should really talk to the team over at J2. They have this neat investing philosophy that goes a little bit broader, that really incorporates federal funding, federal sales into their support model. You should go have a conversation. So they're showing up to us, maybe skeptical. They're not expecting to sell to federal. They've maybe heard some negative things. Maybe they've heard that it's a time waster to sell to federal, whatever it is. And so for those people, you probably don't need a federal market sizing slide, because we don't expect startups who pitch us to necessarily be aware of that. On the other hand, if you are principally a defense tech company, if you're principally, if federal sales are part of your go-to-market strategy, if you think that you're going to get SBIR funding, any other sort of non-dilutive R&D capital from the government, or you expect the government will be a significant customer in the near term, you absolutely need to have this sort of analysis. It doesn't have to be I showed you the pyramid. That's the way I like to present it. If that's bad, if that's not a good fit for you, no worries, but you need to have something. Okay. So, yeah, but by the way, please, if anybody has any questions about anything, or it's like, if anything doesn't make sense, what I'm saying, please drop it in the chat. I'll pause myself, address questions as we're going along. I just, I don't want to get to the end and then, have people forget to ask questions. And frankly, I always enjoy a little pause to talk about what's most interesting to you guys. So yeah, let's see here. So if you have the headline here, if you have an incredibly compelling commercial market and you have nothing federal, that might be okay. You can still make it work. All right. So let's assume that you are really planning on incorporating federal go-to-market, a federal piece of your pitch for like why an investor should be interested in investing in you. Let's imagine that there is a piece of that is federally oriented. So we're going to approach this two ways, like I said. First, we're going to approach this bottom up. And to do that, we're going to do is pretty simple. We're going to collect federal spending data. We're going to clean the data. We're going to size the total market. Then we're going to remove inaccessible contracts. Then we're going to focus on what I call new business, new federal contractor friendly spending. And we're just going to keep refining our view of the data until we get to a place where we can say, yep, these are really credible, good contracts for each piece of the market. That pyramid from like the total market at the bottom down to the more accessible piece of the market at the top. Okay, looks good. All right, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to share my screen. We're just going to talk through how you go about doing this. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see my screen. I'm over here at a website called USA Spending. Let me reset. I actually already downloaded some data. The one consistent issue I have with USA Spending is that it can take a little while to download data. So I just pre-downloaded some just to make sure that it was ready for us on this stream, and that you guys weren't waiting, 20 minutes while USA Spending processed the request. But here's what I would do. So let's just say, for sake of argument, that your company is in the kind of augmented training space. So you have a startup that does some sort of augmented reality, virtual reality training. So it's pretty straightforward. You're just going to put in some keywords: augmented reality training. Great. Virtual reality training. AR/VR training. Okay. Obviously, there's probably if anybody on the stream is in the AR/VR training space, I'm sure you know a bunch of other keywords that we should use to try to get all the contracts and like capture as much of the federal spending in that space as we can. But for the sake of this conversation, this should be enough. Okay, next thing I recommend you do is come here to fiscal year, and I encourage you to select, let's call it the last 5 fiscal years. So you may have noticed that I just selected 6. And here's why I selected 6. So technically we're in fiscal 25, but fiscal 25 began on October 1st. So there's only been, what is that, October, November, December. Even at best, there's only about 3 months of spending data that we have for fiscal 25 that could have shown up here. Number one. Number two, in my experience, it probably takes 3 to 4 months for actual government spending and awards data to show up in these databases. So the data that we get for fiscal 25 is going to be really, it's going to be inaccurate. It's going to be unrepresentative. It's going to look incredibly small. So, we could just not even select it. That would probably be fine. I'm going to select it just so I'd rather have it and not need it. But once you've done this, you've got your keywords in, you've got your fiscal year selected. And by the way, if you're a more sophisticated government vendor, by all means, feel free to start dialing in around, NAICS codes, PSC codes. All of those are great. It'll save you some cleanup later. And so if you know your codes, by all means use them. But if you're new to federal and you're just dipping your toe in the water, I don't want to overwhelm you with a bunch of government market in the weeds stuff. So we're going to pass over that. Okay, because we can do everything we need to do. We can do without the additional filters. Okay, great. I'm going to hit submit. It's going to think for a little bit, and then bada bing, bada bang. Here we've got a whole list of contracts that theoretically have something to do with AR, VR, augmented reality training. Okay, so what I encourage you to do then is come up here to download. I prefer transaction level data, and I'll show you why here in a second. But transaction level data, select everything, close, and it could take it a second to process your request. It could take it literally a couple hours to process. Depends on how many records come back and how many people are on USA Spending at that exact moment. But like I said, I pre-downloaded some data just to make sure that we had it accessible. So here we go. All right, so this is the data that I pulled for us. All right, so great. So this is a download. It shows up as a zip file. Great. Coming in here. So there are going to be, almost always, there's going to be 4 documents inside inside the downloaded thing. It's basically, there's assistance and contracts. And assistance is, this isn't exactly correct, but the best way to think about assistance is going to be like grants. And sometimes this can be a big deal. Like if there's a big grant out there to, spend money on, to give grant money to whatever local fire departments for AR, VR training, that actually could be really interesting for you if you're trying to do a market sizing exercise. But importantly, or at least, importantly and typically, anything that goes to assistance will mean that it's going to be going through the states. So it's like if there's a big block grant to provide AR, VR training to firefighters, in Western states, cool. That's real market and real dollars you could chase. But that means that the money is going to go from the federal government to the state government to local fire departments, typically, who are then going to buy the resources. Or, maybe it'll be a state level fire academy, maybe would buy it. Bottom line, it's happening at the state level, not at the federal level. So if you're more sophisticated, you want that level of nuance and you want to capture that spending, by all means, open those up. But, excuse me, the real action for you is going to be the prime transactions. Oh, but before I open up the prime transaction, let me just explain this. The last one, contract subawards, it's exactly what it sounds like. This would be AR, VR, virtual, whatever, training solutions that instead of the money being spent at the prime contractor level, it's a subcontract for those things, which is great. In general, the volume of transactions there is relatively low. Actually, it's interesting. Apparently the subcontracts are actually quite large, or in fact are larger than the prime transactions. But so maybe in this case you'd look at this and say, actually, I do want to include subawards. So maybe we'll tell you what. Well, let's go. If we have time, we'll go through them. We'll go through both the prime and the subcontract transactions. But for your purposes for creating a market size analysis, the prime transactions should get you where you need to go. Okay. So for those of you who haven't spent a lot of time inside of this data, this is what it looks like. I just want to save this as an Excel, as a full Excel, not as a CSV. It just makes the analysis, just makes some of the analytics a little bit easier. Okay. But for those of you who aren't familiar, this is what I just want to give a quick note on what we're looking at. So this is a spreadsheet that contains records of all the federal spending that's occurred in our topic area. So in our case, virtual reality training. And the reason why so the difference between a transaction and awards is, so an award would just say, hey, on whatever, January 16th in 2025, the government issued a $10 million contract to whatever, Lockheed Martin to do this training. And that contract is expected to last, whatever, 2 years. But the actual spending, the actual times when the government is like actually paying out to Lockheed Martin for the payments under that $10 million contract, each of those payments is the transaction. So it's one of these, it's one of these records. Each of these is like a payment to a vendor from the government. And the reason why this is important, or the reason why I really prefer to look at it in this direction, is because it takes out a lot of lumpiness. One of the dangers of just looking at the award level is that you're going to say, there was a $5 billion contract that was awarded in 2019, and then there was like barely any spending in 2018, 2020 around it, because all of the spending was actually kind of coming out as individual payments under that one mega award. So if you just look at an award level, your plot of market size is going to look really lumpy, right? It's just going to be like, in 2019, there was an insane amount of spending and barely any around it. Whereas if you look at it on a transaction level, it shows how that the spending under that mega $5 billion contract gets spread out over years, which, number one, I think is a much more accurate reflection of what the market size really is, number one. And then number two, I think it's a lot more favorable to you as a small business, or as pitching, because that looks to an investor like, hey, this is the size of the market, it's steady over time. Instead of it say basically, because if you just show the award level spending, it would just be like, oh my God, you missed the boat. All the spending happened in 2019. There's no market left for you. So anyway, that's what I think the big difference is. So great, we've got the data. Looks like there are about 3,629 transactions in this data set. So step number one of this data, I would say, is cleaning it up, because a lot of the data in here, I know we put in the keywords, and I know you would expect that every one of these transactions would be related to our keywords, the virtual AR, VR training. It is shocking how much clutter ends up in this data set. Like, even though we put in keywords, there's going to be some weird stuff. I don't know what, but there will be some weird transactions and contracts that have nothing to do with virtual reality training. So, first step, I would argue, is to get rid of that, because if you leave it in, it's going to totally distort your analysis on the market size, what you can reasonably go for, and it's going to really mess you up, because the same data that we use for the market sizing, we're going to want to use that same data when it comes time to do the go-to-market strategy, like identifying customers in here. Like if we come over here, like all of this information over here relates to who the customers are that were buying all of this training, and we're going to want to use that. If we keep going, all of this over here is information about who the winners were. So which means you're going to want to use that information for when it comes time to understand who your competitors are. If you do if you do your competition slide, these people will likely be in your competition. But anyway, so step number one is to go in here and clean the data. And the best place to clean the data is if we come here, we just do a search for the description. Okay. And what we're looking for is this column right here. I'm just going to open it up so you can see it. And I'm also going to tell you, let me just make the screen a little bit bigger so it's easier for y'all to read. Because this is important to be able to see it. Okay. So here's what we're looking for. So if we look at this, for example, like here we go. Like all of this stuff here. Federal supply schedule contract. Like what? Fair enough. It was bought through GSA schedule, but there's no indication that it was a contract for virtual reality training, anything like that. So, like, I would argue you should get rid of those. Then you have things up here. Sorry, I'm also going to add filters to this. It'll help us get rid of some of the bad matches. So then we have stuff up here. It's like training support systems and services. Like potentially that's a really good contract. Like potentially that could involve virtual reality training where you could start putting your company and you could start saying, hey, this is part of my market, because even though these are really high level descriptions, if you read within that acquisition, there is actually some money going toward virtual reality training within that. We don't know. So, but I'm saying this is the sort of analysis you're going to want to do. Okay. But tell you what, so for the time being, like again, honestly, whenever I do this for my own companies, for one of our portfolio companies, if I'm helping them out, this data cleaning takes the vast majority of my time. Like once you clean the data, everything else becomes pretty easy, but cleaning the data is exhausting. But so it's just, put on, sit down on your couch, put on a movie you like, get a drink, and just like enjoy yourself to the extent you can while you're doing this, because, there's no way around it. It's tedious. So, but let me just show you a little bit of the data cleaning, like what I would do. So what I would do is I'd come in here, and then I would go contains this, and I'm going to say, okay, great. So it's that. I'm going to apply the filter. And so now I would go through and say, okay, you know what? Just all of these, it's too hard to know what they're actually talking about. Is this actually about virtual reality training, or is it something else? I don't know, but it's impossible to know, so I'm going to get rid of it. And then I'm just going to come here, delete rows. Then you can see if I come back here, data, clear the filters, and you can see all of those contracts, all of those ones that I thought were kind of bad matches are all gone now. Like this one, USNS Salvador TARS 52 VR. No idea what that is. I would probably get rid of it. Now that I realize, but like excuse me. Actually, but like this one looks great. Like this is an awesome contract. Like this is definitely part of our market. I mean, you have to read through it, but it looks like if I'm reading this, as I'm reading this, it's like, okay, this is so you guys forward combat and command component. It's looking to operational realism and minimize negative warfighter training, advanced high fidelity live and virtual constructive simulations, hardware. It like all of this sounds like advanced technology integrated into a training exercise. All right, great. That is, in our hypothetical world where we're trying to size the market for a virtual reality training product, that's exactly right. Awesome. Okay, great. So that one, like, we would want to keep this one. Let's see. Then we would just read the next one. Okay. So this one is provide training and technical assistance for gunnery driver training. Okay, so it's doing, it's doing training for sure. So it meets that requirement. Is the sort of training, is this thinking, hey, this is just going to be, you're going to send a bunch of people who are experts in that, they're going to do the training for you, and like, is it like traditional classroom training? In which case, maybe you'd want to delete it because that's not your market. Or you might say, actually, no. I think that we can replace all training, so we're going to scope our market as all training. In which case, maybe you'd keep it in. So those are the sorts of things where I think reasonable people can differ. And like, legitimately, like if you come to me with this slide and you leave this contract in, I won't be mad. Like, I won't be like, okay, no, that's fine. Like, you're scoping your market as the entirety of the training space. I might think that's a little bit bigger than what I would have expected, but whatever. That's reasonable. But on the other hand, if this was, if you put this into your analysis, if you included that as part of your market sizing exercise, I wouldn't love that, because it's like, why on earth do you think that's reasonable to include? Like, this transaction, from everything we can tell, has absolutely nothing to do with virtual reality training. You're just trying to pad your market, and that doesn't look good for anybody. Cool. I'm just going to check the chat real quick. I just want to see if there's any big questions in here. Okay. Got a couple questions. Glad I checked. All right. Our category is robots on the USAF flight line. We're unlikely to find existing contracts because we're pioneering. Suggestions. Yeah, great question, Stephen. So here's what I'd recommend there, is scope your market as whatever it is you're replacing. So like, it's like, even though we're doing virtual reality training, I think it's reasonable to say that your market is federal training services. Like, I don't think that you have to say our market is only money being spent on this solution today. Because your whole point is, look, we're going to come up with a brand new, never before seen, really extraordinary solution to training, to flight line support. And so all of these contracts that right now are pretty traditional maintenance contracts, we could go take those. We could go pursue them. We could go, make them ours, and we could go displace that. So I think there's no problem with Stephen, in your case, saying, whatever it is your robots are expected to do, just that's your market. It's not the market for robots already doing it, because to your point, that doesn't exist yet. You're pioneering. That's the whole premise of venture is, these are solutions that do not yet exist. How you're going to do it for you. We're going to do something that's entirely new. And as we go through our data analytics exercise, as we're working through our Excel sheets together, you're going to see how we tease it apart. And I guess one reasonable response is say, hey Jeff, shouldn't you just start with all training? And that I think that is reasonable. We could have started with all federal training. It's going to be a huge number, and it's going to be a lot of really just kind of like commodity onboarding training that is so far afield that I don't know if I would consider it part of the market. But if you want to say, hey, look, federal training spending or federal flight line spending is a giant number, and then that's defensible also. Anyway, you'll see as we start going through the numbers how we're going to start whittling them down. So I hope that answers your question. If not, please feel free to clarify it. Have I tried AlloSense? Have I tried using ChatGPT to do the data cleaning? I did try it once, and honestly, it worked well. I'm sorry, I've tried it a couple times, and it worked well when I was sharing smaller data sets. It was, if I shared like 100 records and said 100 descriptions and said, hey, which of these relate to training? It wasn't terrible. ChatGPT, I thought, did a pretty good job. The problem I ended up having was that it was just these data sets can actually be quite long, so it becomes difficult to actually go through and figure out. Just keep moving it over to ChatGPT, and anyway, I'm also not like a prompt engineer. I'm not super smart when it comes to the best ways to use LLMs and other generative AI tools. So if you know how to do that more effectively, I would love to know about it, because I would love to make this part of my life faster when I'm doing this, either when I'm diligencing companies that are pitching us or when I'm trying to help out portfolio companies. I'd love to make this faster. All right, but thank you for the questions. All right, let me go back. So I'm just going to go back into this. So let's just keep working through the data. And if you have questions, please drop them into chat. All right, cool. All right, so coming back to our Excel here. Okay, so for the sake of this, of keeping this moving, I'm just going to go ahead and say that we've finished our data cleaning. Okay. So here's what I recommend doing now. Okay, we're going to come in here. We're going to insert pivot table. Everything's selected, and a pivot table is just every Excel always has this. It doesn't matter you're on a Mac, you're on a PC, doesn't matter. Pivot tables are great. It's just a really convenient way to quickly analyze and manage large data sets. So here's what you're going to want to do. Come here to Federal Action Obligation. Okay, take Federal Action Obligation, put into values. And basically what the Federal Action Obligation is remember I told you that every row is a payment from the government to a vendor, right? So the Federal Action Obligation is the amount of money the government spent at that moment. So the amount of money that went from the government to the vendor. So if we do the sum of all of the federal action obligations, we should get a number that is the total federal outlays, the actual money that went from the federal government to companies in that data, in our data set for in this case for training. Okay, and then we're going to also use I want to add action date fiscal year to the columns, and we get something that looks about like this. All right, and then we're just going to do cool. All right. And so what this is telling us is that in 2020, about $304 million was spent on training. And in this case, let's say that this is going to be, so this would be training, conventional training and virtual augmented reality, whatever training. So that's that, and then all the way over. So this is the amount of money that actually went from government to companies per year, which is, I would argue, the biggest version of our market. Oh, and by the way, check it out. Look over here, 2014. All the other years, we're talking, kind of high 300s, low $400 million a years in spending. Here we are in 2025, only 14 million. That's not because federal spending on training decreased. It's just lag in the data being reported. So don't worry about if you see that. It's really if it's fallen, that's just fine. All right. So next thing I would do is I would take I'd take like a ballpark here. So I would argue, whatever. All of these numbers are right about $400 million. So on my slide, if I was making a slide about like this, that looked roughly like this, I might put 400 million right here. Great. Because this is the total. This is like the widest, broadest interpretation of your market, of the training market is the base, the total. Great. Cool. So that gives us our total market. All right, excuse me. Next, let's start whittling this down into what I would consider to be more and more actionable stuff. You know, the things that, like, realistically, because, like, some of these contracts, you know, some of the stuff in here is going to be giant. It's going to be like $100 billion award. No, that's an exaggeration. It's going to be like $100 million awards to Lockheed Martin that, you know, let's be honest, you and I are not going to be able to win. So here's what we're going to do. What we want to do now is to try to whittle it down a little bit. Okay? So let's see. So the way we're going to do this is start actually pulling out exactly what it is that we think that we could actually win, or at least, like, we could, like, how do I say this? That we could reasonably pursue as a new vendor. Okay? So here's the way I encourage you to do that. Okay. So on the available side, the first thing here is there an apparent award ID? So what this means is basically, so the government really loves to use master services agreements. So like things, how do I describe this? Things that are just so big. Like they're master services agreements. They're just contracts that incorporate a wide bundle of things, and a lot of money flows through them. The problem is that as a new vendor, as like a startup, the chances that you're actually going to be able to get onto an MSA are almost zero. It's really hard. It's not something that you can realistically do in the next, I'll choose a number, 5 years. I mean, if you went all in, there are exceptions to every rule, but generally speaking, getting onto an IDIQ, getting onto a GWAC, getting into any of these parent award ID type contracts, it's really hard. So I'm going to put that into the filters block. Okay. Next thing I'm going to do is type of contract pricing. And so contract pricing, what that's talking about is, I'm going to simplify this conversation. There are basically two types of pricing. There's fixed price contracts and there are variable cost contracts. I'm happy to talk about this more if people care, but the reason this is important to you is if you're doing variable cost contracts, so cost reimbursable, cost plus fixed fee, any of those, you end up having to have a very robust and well audited accounting infrastructure, and it's expensive and it's hard to get as a startup. So, like, realistically, you're not going to do it as a startup. So we want to get rid of any contracts where that's the pricing model. And the last thing I'm going to put in here, we're not going to use it exactly yet, but here we go. Contract extent competed. And basically this will be easier to explain with an example. So let's pause on the extent competed piece. So, but if we just start with these, so parent award. So what we're seeing here is these are all of these numbers here, all of these, these are parent awards. So these are like these GWACs, these IDIQs, these master services agreements that realistically you can't get on. So what I suggest you do is you get rid of all of them and you just choose blank. And what that means, excuse me, these are all the contracts in your space that got competed directly, that weren't competed through an IDIQ. And so that you as a company, as a startup, you could plausibly pursue it, okay? And so as you'll see, that, you know, that knocked 85% of the market out. Like, we were talking like $400 million a year of spending. Now we're down into like the $30-40 million a year of spending just by knocking out these parent awards. Okay, so as you can see, it's a huge consolidator. Like it really, it reduces the amount of stuff that you're potentially going to go after. It's going to really make your market much smaller. Nobody likes that, but I think it's important to put this into your slide. Like, you know, and transparently, like I think that our fund, you know, this is all we do is investing in companies that have this federal adjacency. So as a result, like we know all these tricks and like we're looking for them. And whereas, yeah, I don't know, you know, maybe if you're pitching like a traditional commercial investor, I don't know, maybe you could just pull the wool over their eyes and like say, oh yeah, my market's $400 million a year, and they wouldn't know any different. But you know, like I said, this is all we do, so this is how we look at the world. Okay. Then on pricing, basically, I'm just going to get rid of all of the cost plus, cost blah, blah, blah. I'm just going to select the fixed price. Yeah, these two. I'm just going to choose firm fixed price award fee. Those are fine. Let's just keep those. And as you can see, it took a little bit off of our market size, but not a ton. So this is like roughly, so it's like here we have like 60 million, but I would say most of these numbers are right around $30 million a year. Like if I just look across the last 4 years, you know, it's roughly $30 million a year of market size of spending per year. So cool. So I would put that, you know, yeah. So I would say this is your available market, you know, right around $30 million. Okay. So that's the next step, is knocking out all the stuff that you realistically don't have access to. So I'm just gonna check the I'm just gonna check the chat. All right, let me see here. Okay, sorry, Jeff. Before you move on, where did you parse the data from? Sorry, yeah. Okay, so Romario. So yeah, so basically the data. Yeah, I just want to make sure that you can see this. So the data that I'm parsing came from here. So it's USA Spending. I think this is the best website for sourcing federal spending data. You can put in some keywords. You know, in retrospect, I probably should have just put in training, because training would be the entire market, which is what we want for that bottom layer of. So if what we want for this down here, and then we should have, it would end up, because realistically, like the entire training market is what we're going after. We're just trying to do it in a new way. So what I did was, so I ended up coming in here, I put in my keywords, I selected the last 5-6 years of fiscal data. You know, I don't really care how much the government was spending back in 2008. That's not important to my analysis. So I just chose the last few ones, hit download, and then it's going to ask these questions. So I chose transactions, everything, and then closed. And then so that's where the data came from. And then you'll see this. This is the folder that you'll get when it's ready for you to download. Open up the contract prime transactions, and that folder, or excuse me, that Excel file is this. So that's where I got the data that I'm parsing. So yeah, so for people who missed that, there you go. And so there was one other question here. Yeah, okay. Roman asks a really good question. Is a master services agreement like a program of record? Really good question. The answer is no. So I'm trying to think. They're not the same, but they are related. So here's, I'm sorry. The reason I'm pausing here is I just don't want us to go down too deep of a rabbit hole. But you know what? You came to a webinar about government acquisitions data and market sizing, so I'll probably go a little bit deeper than you wanted, but this is knowledge you need at some point in your federal journey. So just anything that's not relevant to you today, just tuck it away because you're going to need to know this at some point soon. Okay. So in order to get a government contract, there needs to be three things in place. You need to have budget. So money, the government needs to have money that they can spend and give to you. The second thing that you need is a contract. It's an agreement, a regulatorily blessed, correct, legally sound contract between you and the government. And that contract allows you to give the government goods and services and allows the government to give you the money, right? And typically speaking, those contracts are supposed to be competitively released. So, the government isn't supposed to just say, oh, hey, there's Joe. We were in the Marine Corps together. I'm going to give him a contract because I like him. No, it's like the government is supposed to say, hey, I need, new robots for my flight line or new training solutions or whatever it is. And they hold it, they put out an RFP and they take bids and they look at proposals and they choose the best one. And if Joe wins, okay, it was a competitive process or whatever. Okay, so you need to have a contract. And the third thing that you need then is a user, is somebody who's saying, hey, I want a better training solution. I want robots to help me on my flight line. Those are the three things that you basically need to get a government contract. The program of record relates to the budget side of that. So when a program of record is put out there, it basically is Congress saying, hey, we're going to allocate 5 years worth of budget into this program, and we're going to, I don't want to get this to be too technical, but I also don't want to say things that are incorrect for the sake of simplicity. A program of record it actually starts before Congress. So a program of record is when a government agency, so some program office says, hey, I want new flight line support, I want new VR training, and they actually they put it into their budget request and say, hey, we want this, we want budget for this. And basically what it just means is that it's a program of record. It's like a program that got put into the budget and someone's saying, hey, this is my program, I care about it, hey, Congress, I hope you fund it. And if they do, it's really good for you because it's very certain, stable funding for that first leg of our contracting stool. A MSA, like an IDIQ or a GWAC, is the second leg of that stool. It's saying, what is the contractual relationship that exists between the vendor and the government? And basically I have a whole video on my YouTube channel about these, but basically the best comparison I can make is it's like you're going through the airport and you have to go through security, right? If you go through security normally, that's like a normal RFP, right? It's like you go to security and they're going to wand you down and make you take your shoes off and check your bag. They're going to vet you every time, right? Having an MSA, like an IDIQ or a GWAC, is kind of like having TSA pre-check. They do a bunch of vetting up front, but then assuming you get through the vetting, you get an IDIQ or pre-check, and then every subsequent transaction becomes just a lot easier. Every time you go through security, when you have pre-check, it's just much easier. So MSAs are related to the contractual side of getting, the competition in creating the contract side of getting federal budget. Programs of record are about the budget itself. I hope that answers your question. I also see you answered a second question. 2025, there was negative value. Why is that? Yeah, this happens from time to time. It's funny that it was negative all the way through. What that probably means is that the government clawed some money back. So it probably means that the government, they contracted with a small business or a large business, small business, whatever, and then they basically just said, hey, we overspent whatever it was. They pulled the money back, and so there were so many clawbacks that it caused 2025 to go negative. It's really rare to see a full fiscal year be negative, And that's the only reason that's happening is that we are so new. Again, we're only, technically we're 4 months into 2025, but the reality is that there's typically like a 3 to 4 month data lag between transactions happening and transactions getting into USA spending, which from our perspective doesn't matter. Like 3-4 months of delay, who cares? We're looking at the last 5 years, so like it has time to get reported. But it just means that there are so few transactions being recorded for fiscal 25 right now. There are so few transactions in the database that it's created this weird situation. It's nothing to be concerned about. It just, if you're showing your deck, if you're showing your spreadsheet to investors and you're like, hey, here's how I did my market sizing. First of all, it's very unlikely that an investor is going to ask for that. Like, I'm the only investor who would ever ask for that. Like, very few investors have this level of federal market awareness. But that's the only time you might need to explain it. But I love the questions. Please keep them coming. Okay, all right, and then that's the first 2 pieces. So that's our total market, our available market, our obtainable market. An obtainable market, basically, I just want to put in here is just our analysis of what you as a new business could realistically obtain. Like, it's a competitive landscape, so what could you realistically obtain? And the way I recommend doing that is you come in here, boop, excuse me, all right, and then you just look at the extent competed. And here's what I would say. And I would say competed under SAP, and then not competed under SAP, or not competed. And basically what those 3 things are, those are just 3 contracting mechanisms, competition mechanisms that indicate that the government didn't go through the headache of a full solicitation. Like they probably didn't go through like a full RFP on SAM with like a big response and like long timelines and like crazy competition. SAP is simply an acquisition process. It's just a way for the government to buy things, typically smaller dollar figure, quickly. And then not competed means it was a sole source. It was just the government saying, hey, I want to give this money to this person. And then not competed under SAP means that it was a sole source award justified under the simplified acquisitions process. Bottom line, the reason these numbers here these are the numbers that I would argue are realistically things that you could go chase and win as a very new vendor in the very in the next year. So like this is stuff you could be winning soon. And so I would argue, so here we have a little bit of volatility. Like 2021 was a huge year for SAP contracts apparently, or SAP and sole source. But whatever, if I look across the last 5 years, you might say, hey, roughly the average of this is around $20 million. Cool. So what I would do is I would then come in here and say obtainable $20 million, because that's what I can realistically obtain in the last 20 years. Or I'm sorry. That's what I can realistically obtain in the next 1 to 2 years. My apologies. All right. Once you've got your obtainable, next thing I recommend you do is you come in here and then descriptions. Okay. I'm looking for Primal War base transaction description, drop it in here, and what we're going to see now, it's all of the descriptions for all of the contracts that we think are like in our strike zone, right? So we can come here, wrap the text. Okay, cool. Actually, just make it easier for you guys to read it. Let me just add the grid lines. Oh, sorry. Add the grid lines. Cool. All right, so then I would start going through here, like leading virtual teams, leading training course for 41 attendees. That's actually, that's probably a bad fit, just because it's the wrong kind of virtual. virtual webinars, virtual. But I would just start looking through here, and I would say, it's like, okay, what of this stuff looks interesting? Yeah, okay, virtual reality training. Boom. I would just grab, I would grab this, the description, and then I would put the description of some of these representative contracts over here. This is going to give color to the numbers, because we're saying it's, hundreds of millions total, it's tens of millions available, it's 20 million obtainable. Well, what's actually in those numbers? We can put some representative contracts in here. And then current. And current is, this is something that I like to see as an investor, because it tells me that this person really knows their market. Current just means how much of the market is currently using your tech. So it's not just virtual reality, it's not just training in small size contracts that you could reasonably get that aren't through master services agreements and aren't using accounting requirements that you can't meet. It's saying, okay, all of that, and it is currently in your strike zone. So like we had one person ask a question. It was like, hey, we're doing flightline robots. There is zero money happening on flightline robots because you're pioneering. Cool. So I would expect your obtainable, because the obtainable is just going to be like your flight line activities market size, that the activities within the flight line that you're going to replace. The available, same thing. The total, same thing. The current might be zero, and that's okay. If you come along and say, hey, look, there is a huge market and a huge need to improve this part of flight line operations, and right now the Air Force is spending a tremendous amount of money on that part of flight line operations, and they're doing none of it with robots. I think that we can go in there, we can create the robot, we can totally transform how the Air Force does things. We can capture, in the next year, we can get, a big piece of this attainable market in sort of the 2 to 5 year range. Maybe we're starting to nibble on the available market, and then, within 10 years, we'll be doing a significant portion of the total market, because so much of this will have shifted from, just men and women walking the flight line doing the work to robots walking the flight line doing the work. So, but that's about it. This is the essence of the market. It's from a very big generalized observation about the market all the way down to progressively more refined cuts of that same data. So, cool. Sorry, I was just checking my time. Let me just check the question area. All right. From Romario, is this data reflective of COTS product? Yes. Yeah. So this data should include anytime that the government spent money, whether it was on a COTS product, it was on a bespoke product, it was R&D for a product, shouldn't really matter. This is where it should be. It should be appearing here. So yeah. All right. So I see that we're at time. So my apologies. This is going a little long. So I'm just going to do tell you what, I think this is by far the biggest piece of it. Yeah. Yeah, so I would just say, this is the essence of it. I'm going to be putting out, with the information that you have today, you can do a really good first draft of your market slide. I'm going to be probably putting out a video just on this with a much tighter version of the class or the webinar that I just gave. So please be on the lookout for that when it comes out. But yeah, no, I'm happy to hang out. I'm happy to stick around and answer questions. I'm probably just going to keep doing I'm just going to start going through I'm just going to be riffing about, here's some good practices I've seen over the years, or hey, what worked well? Where are some of the issues I've seen with people's budgets? But if people need to leave, totally understand. You've gotten the core of the information you need. All right. So, bada bing, bada bang. Yeah, you're very welcome, Roman. Thank you. I'm really glad you could make it. All right. Okay. Also, by the way, yeah, so just in case people are wondering, so I do also, as part of this whole series of webinars on how, helping people make dual-use venture pitch decks, I also do deck reviews. So if you're interested in having me review your deck on one of these webinars, it's meant to be constructive. It's 100%. I selfishly, what I want is I want to get better decks. That's the only reason I do this. Is I get decks, and one of the things that I fear that keeps me up at night is that a really good company just did a bad job communicating their value proposition, and I'm missing out on a great company just because of miscommunication of people not understanding how to talk about the federal market, and so I throw away their deck and I miss out on a great investment. So I do these things to help all of us get better, and because eventually it helps me selfishly. And I'm also I'm a vet. I'm also I'm in the Army Reserves. I want to see more good tech companies come in and provide new technology to the people that my brothers and sisters in arms. So I really do want to see more of you be successful, and that's why I do this. So yeah. All right. And you're very welcome to everybody. Yeah, if I understand people need to drop, thank you so much. Really appreciate all the any likes, subscribes, always appreciated. All right. But I've got, I've got a couple minutes, and as long as there are people that are still on the stream, yeah, see there's still 7, 8 people on the stream, I'm happy to just keep sharing a couple observations. Number one observation is if you want to take this market slide to the next level, separate out the R&D from the everything else. So the easiest way to do that is you come here, come back to your pivot table, go to product or service code, and then here, it'll be easier to show you this way. Okay, so what country? I'm sorry, that's not what I wanted. Product or service code. My mistake. All right, here it is. Okay, so this is a nice way to cut the data also. So these are the product and services codes have a really nice convention. So if a product or service code starts with a number, it means that's a product. If it starts with a letter, it means it's a service. If it starts with the letter A, it means it's R&D funding. So if we look at this, we can see that in the year 2020, there was about $900,000 of R&D spending in the training space. There was about, what is that, $250,000 in 21. And so you can start coming along here and you can start seeing, okay, how much R&D funding versus actual procurement was there by year. For bonus points, you can call that out in your slides and say, hey, of the $10 million a year of market, 1 million of that is for R&D funding. The rest of it is for acquisitions. That is actually really helpful, especially if you're trying to make the claim to an investor that's hey, if you give me whatever, $500,000, I'm going to be able to clean up another $2 million of SBIRs and BAAs and other federal non-dilutive R&D funding. That's a really compelling case. As an investor, I love the idea that I give you 500 and you're going to basically grow that 500 by another million or two of additional R&D funding that doesn't dilute me and doesn't dilute you. So if you're making the case that you're going to use federal R&D as a major funding source, you'll want to do this breakout with the PSC codes. Cool. What else? Sorry, there we go. Yeah. Yeah, this, I guess when, kind of, again, just kind of I'm sort of riffing at this point. One other thing, one problem I do see on federal on federal pitch decks is that they'll try to do like what I would consider to be best practice in the commercial space, which is that you say, hey, I've got there are 500,000 users out there, and each of those users is willing to pay me, choose a number, $100 a month to use my product. It's, I should have been sharing my screen. Yeah, my apologies about that, Alice. Apologies. I hope that if you have if there are specific areas around sharing screen share, just let me know. Sorry, kind of my next just riff was, like I think in commercial pitch decks, the market sizing, like best practices of bottom up, like, hey, they're 100,000 users, and I think that each user is willing to pay me $100 a month. $100 a month times 100,000 users, that's $10 million a month of revenue potentially. Multiply that by 12 months, that's what did I say? $12 million market size. Okay, I mean that's fine. That's fine, but it's really hard to build those numbers in the federal market. Like, it's really, really hard. It's just, I would encourage you not to do the number of users, number of customers times spend per month. It's just, it's too hard to give a data backup for that. Do it this way. Just use the awards data. But yeah, cool. All right, y'all. All right. Sorry, I'm just looking at those questions. How would I suggest making the market more concise if we're pioneering a product? Romario, feel free to just email me. I'm happy to talk to you about markets. Yeah, feel free to reach out. Just email me. I without seeing your deck, it'd be hard to give you a smart answer right now. All right, let's see here. Allison, regarding SAP and obtainable market, what kind of contracts are those? Does that include micro purchases at SBIR phase 1 through 3s? Great question. That does include micro purchases. So last time, I'm pretty sure the micro purchase threshold is 10,000. I think they may have bumped that up, but it was 10,000. It may have gone up a little bit. Micro purchases are effectively, so theoretically they would appear in the award database that I was showing you. But generally they don't appear just because it's so small. That's like, you could imagine, like, otherwise every single time a government officer bought plane tickets somewhere, that's all under the micro purchase threshold. So it would just be overwhelming amounts. So micro purchases probably won't show up in there. Like, you will see transactions for like $20 show up in the data, but that's the exception. SAP contracts, simplified acquisitions, it's basically it's a purchase that is small. So rule of thumb, under $250,000. Under $250,000, and it can have all of the structure, and it can have like a crazy, terrible proposal that's 50-page proposals. It rarely is. Like, the whole purpose of doing an SAP contract is that it's easier for the government. It's easier for you as a startup or as a company to respond. It's a contract where the government typically is not going to include a lot of compliance and regulation and stuff like that. It's just SAP contracts. Again, feel free to reach out. Happy to talk, but it's just a good rule of thumb for us to quickly identify the subset of contracts that are friendly for new businesses. That's kind of how I would describe SAP. SBIR, no. So SBIRs should appear in the data that we were looking at, and SBIRs, would they be included in there? It's a good point. SBIRs probably would not appear in the obtainable market because we had cut out full and open competition and set aside competition. So to your point, that probably SBIRs probably would have gotten cut out in that analysis. That's a good point. Well, cool. What else do people have? I need to jump here pretty soon, but if people have specific questions, I've got 5 more minutes. And I know there's a little bit of a delay, so I'll give it a minute. All right. Well, hey, if there are no more questions, thank you all so much for coming to my webinar. Feel free to reach out, and yeah, I'm going to try to do these every 2 weeks on a different piece of the dual-use pitch deck. So hope to see you in the next one. Oh yeah, good call. I'll throw my email into chat. Ugh. That. Oh yeah, Romario, you're very welcome.